Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name is Dabney and I'm an evolutionary astrologer. This is going to be a video about Saturn going into Aries. Saturn just moved into Aries on May 24th, so it just happened, and this energy is going to be with us for several months before it dips back into Pisces and then forward again in 2026 for a couple years. So I want to talk about Saturn in Aries from a personal level and then from a collective level. So if that's content you're interested in, please do stick around. This channel is all about finding a degree of peace through the cosmos, bringing the planetary energy down here with us in planet Earth and living a more conscious life. So please, as always, like, subscribe, share. I'm grateful for everybody that has any kind of participation in this community. I'm doing the video outside today because Aries is spring. And spring has sprung here in California, and it's really just lovely. I'm sitting in front of our pomegranate tree, which, if I can show you, is already just filled with blossoms, and it's going to probably bear some really beautiful fruit in the fall. And that's part of what I want to talk about, is the process of Aries. And what does it mean when Saturn goes into Aries? So as we know, Neptune has already entered into Aries, and we talked about that kind of almost immediate vibe shift and a little bit of like feeling less clouded, and a little bit like people started to wake up and recognize their own value, recognize where they needed to stand up for themselves. So let's first talk about Saturn in Aries in our own personal lives. So Saturn is about accountability. Saturn is the time master. So Saturn really builds structures. It wants to have a good foundation. But Saturn's a little bit of the law of karma as well. And so no matter where Saturn is traveling in your chart, Saturn is in the sky currently in Aries, but it may be making squares or trines or oppositions in your own personal chart, and you can get more information about this Saturn in Aries and where it's going to affect you in your personal life by seeing which house contains Aries energy. So we're still right at like 0-1 degrees of Saturn in Aries. So we're really at the very tip of this, where we're just trying to understand what this is all about. So Saturn is restrictions. Saturn sometimes feels like lack. Saturn can feel like an obstacle that we have to overcome, but it can be incredibly rewarding. All right. So, you've heard me talk about Saturn being the hard teacher that gives you too much homework, but Saturn is also a little bit like being at the base of a mountain and knowing that you have to get to the top of that mountain, but at the beginning, you just have no idea how you're going to traverse this obstacle. So here we enter a new sign. I, for one, am actually welcoming this energy. I think Saturn in Pisces was very challenging for a lot of people, and there's a lot more clarity around Saturn in Aries. You will hear other astrologers talk about Saturn being in its fall in Aries, and that's because Aries wants to go. Aries is impatient. Aries is forward. It's like momentum. Aries is like ready to, get things done at all costs. And Saturn is a little bit more patience and timing and making sure that, your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. There's something about wanting to make sure you are on a path that is going to be sustainable. Aries doesn't think about sustainability. Aries thinks about rushing forward and just movement, almost for the sake of movement. And that's a little bit like spring. So, it's this beautiful combination of energies to me in some ways, because things can get done, but Saturn can kind of give it a little bit more structure. It can give it some boundaries. It can slow it down when things are starting to careen out of control, which sometimes Aries energy can just go so fast that it doesn't really see the consequences of its actions. So in our own personal life, you look and you see, where is it in your chart? Where do you have this Aries energy? And you can kind of extrapolate a little bit more information about the place in your particular life where you may find some challenges that you have to find the momentum to overcome, where you have to clear the inertia of, Saturn's methodical process and really kind of make sure we're coming and moving things along. But at the same time, if you're really, used to that sort of Aryan energy, if let's say you have an Aries sun or an Aries moon, you may find that this Saturn slows you down a little bit and helps you think things through a little bit more. It may be something of a maturing process for you if you have a lot of Aries energy or like Aries on the ascendant. So there is something when Aries is in this sign, that when Saturn's in this sign, it's like it's calling on your angels to sort of help you continue to move forward, but in a more measured way. So that is how I kind of look at this from a personal standpoint. We will be having collectively, and I'm going to talk more about this, but Jupiter's going to be squaring coming this summer. Jupiter's going to be squaring that Saturn, and I did do a video about that with Fern Vucinic, so you can check that one out, but we'll talk more about that as well. And I just did a video with Nick Dagan Best about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and Saturn moving into Aries. We did talk a lot about that Saturn-Neptune conjunction and kind of all of the energy and what that portends. So on a collective level, let's talk a little bit about where I think things are going. So we cannot look at one thing collectively in isolation, but I'm going to do a little of that, simply because I want to give you the just the general feeling of Saturn in Aries. And so if you have this general understanding of Saturn in Aries, then you can kind of go back and you can watch the video about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And, with Nick, you can go back and watch about the Saturn-Jupiter square. So you can get to different layers. It's all happening together, is what I want to say, right? So, I'm going to talk a lot about the last time Saturn was in Aries, which is kind of a callback to 1997 to 1999. It went in and out a little bit, but I've got some kind of things that happened during that time to give you more of this flavor, more of this energy of Saturn in Aries, but then understand that Pluto's in Aquarius. Neptune is now traveling along with Saturn in Aries. Uranus will be moving into Gemini. We also have Jupiter moving into Cancer. So the sky needs to be looked at collectively and for a collective interpretation. And so that's the same in your personal chart and when we sort of look at like what's the zeitgeist. But I do think we can extrapolate some things and figure out a little bit about what we can expect during this time. So one of the biggest things, if you were to go back in your memory and think about Saturn in Aries during the late 90s, the biggest thing that was happening was the Clinton-Monica Lewinsky scandal. This changed the course of history in many ways because Saturn is restriction, right? We talk about Saturn as being karma. Aries is archetypical male energy. It is very yang. And so women can have archetypical male energy. So when I say male and female, please know that I'm not talking about men and women specifically. You can have, there is that sort of gender fluidity, but understanding that typical male behavior often applies more to a typical man. Doesn't mean all men. Okay, so don't think that I'm man bashing in any way here. But I am going to say Aries is ruled by Mars, which is associated with sexuality and sex. And so here we have the Lord of Karma, the Lord of like, oh, you did not do that, and you need to behave better. Now entering into the sign of Aries, which has to do with sexuality in a lot of ways, because it's procreation, it's keeping life alive. And so we had the Bill Clinton scandal. You know, he liked a young intern, youth. That's Aries as well. So there is something about this time about men who behave badly and so the male, shadow getting a little bit of comeuppance, kind of being exposed, having challenges, having their dirty laundry dragged out into the light during a Saturn and Aries period. So I'm just going to kind of riff on a few of these things. We had the Bill Clinton scandal. We also had O.J. Simpson, who was found liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman during this time in the civil court. And it was like $25 million or something like that. And so that changed his lifetime. And as we know with Clinton, it really tarnished his legacy, which up until that point had been... he was a really popular president. I think it made him more popular in some ways, but only because people were so sick of like having this dirty laundry pushed in their face, and they also recognized the hypocrisy of the people doing it, who were also cheating on their wives, and it was kind of ridiculous. But that did play into the fact that Al Gore did not win decisively, I'll say it that way, in 2000. So, there's kind of like these consequences for men behaving badly. Also, we had Timothy McVeigh, who was the Oklahoma City bomber. He was sentenced to death during this time. So that's kind of just to kind of give you that, that toxic male energy, like violence. So this is not comeuppance for men. It is comeuppance for the shadow of Aries, which can be, hypersexuality, which can be bullying, which can be violence. Some of those sort of things Saturn may expose where you have fallen off. Okay, so the next thing, we have somebody walking a dog, so sorry for the, it sounds like they're on the phone too. I hope they keep walking and don't come over to say hi because I'm recording a video. Okay, you can see it walking by now. Okay. So then another thing that is a theme that I kind of noticed is also people who kind of embody that male energy, that Aryan kind of fiery, like you look at them, they're very individualistic, like Frank Sinatra. I did it my way. Very Aries song. Frank Sinatra, he passed away during Saturn and Aries. Also, a terrible war dictator, genocidal leader, Pol Pot, he also died during Saturn and Aries the last time. This one probably falls in the category of the first thing I was talking about, but it was also the death of Princess Diana. And the death of Princess Diana really shined a new light on the misbehavior of the royal family, like her mistreatment. And it really shined a light as well on Prince Charles. So there was some kind of karmic accountability there for his philandering and his betrayal, and that really kind of put him under this new microscope. Okay, so we have also, interestingly enough, we have an interesting thing like where women, it's kind of the spotlight has been on women behaving badly. And so it's not that things are going to get easier for women, because I don't think that it is. It didn't in the late 90s. However, there is kind of a new movement toward women embodying more of that warrior archetype, more of owning their own sexuality. There is kind of a sense of especially with Neptune in Aries, I think we're going to see more of this too, where women for the first time, at least in my lifetime, were highlighted as heroes. And so I think with Saturn going into Aries, there is this kind of sense of seeing the restrictions of toxic male energy. Like there's kind of like a new spotlight being shown on it, and there's a new accountability that needs to happen. Sort of like the movie Saving Private Ryan came out during the last Saturn in Aries. And I think there was something about, kind of holding men up as heroes, like looking at them being in their highest integrity versus kind of what I think has been over the past several years definitely not been an emphasis on character and integrity and loyalty and duty. So I think there's going to be more of an emphasis on that kind of, are you a good man? Saturn wants you to be your best at all times. And so I think there's going to be a new spotlight on men who are not living up to the promise of what it means to be a healthy, strong male role model. So during this time, we had Sex and the City premiered, which was really women celebrating their friendship, embodying their sexuality. I actually never really liked that show personally. I think it has to do with my own astrological chart, but I know it was very important to a lot of my female friends. I'm of that generation, and I never had the money to dress up fancy and get Cosmos at the bar, and and I never slept around like that. So I didn't identify with the show, but I understand its merits and why it was important to a lot of people, because it really highlighted their experience and what they were going through. And so again, it was also exposing men behaving badly, like breaking up with you on a Post-it note was one of the episodes, and like how awful that was. And so there was kind of this female empowerment and women owning their sexuality again, and also owning that they had different objectives. Like it's not like we're all Samantha or we're all Carrie or we're all Charlotte or we're all Miranda. It was sort of this like spectrum of like women showing their own individuality and owning what they wanted in their life. So in their own individual way, and celebrating their friendship and loyalty to one another. Okay, shout out to my Buffy friends. This is the year that Buffy premiered as well. So here, that was a very feminist show that was incredibly important to a lot of women, myself included, that showed that women could kick ass, more or less. Like, even in the most complicated of times, we feel like the world is on our rests on our shoulders. And there was sort of this expression of, we actually are doing so much, and we have this like large range of emotions, and if only we could just kick the bad guy's ass, things would feel so much simpler. But then it explored how that's really not the case. The last thing I'll mention about the last time Saturn was in Aries was the movie Titanic came out, and that won an Oscar, and everyone saw Titanic, right? And the chivalry Leonardo was a hero. Hubris and just moving forth against the wishes or the warnings of others resulted in the ship going down. And I think that's a little bit of what we're going to see. I think, and a lot of people suffered on the Titanic as a result of people thinking they know better. People thinking they know that we are unsinkable, that kind of hubris. So I think Saturn in Aries will take down that kind of I know best, I am invincible hubris. Unfortunately, a lot of innocent people died, and I imagine that a lot of innocent people are going to be taken down with the Titanic that we are all currently sailing on now. So what do you do? when you can see iceberg ahead? Well, first and foremost, grab your loved ones, grab a life vest, prepare. Okay, that's the best thing that you can do, and be brave. You're being called to be brave right now. That's what Saturn in Aries in its highest form is all about, is staying strong and being brave. Kate Winslet, I forget her character's name, and it was Jack and Rose. Rose survived. She was smart. She used her wits. She thought on her feet, but she went back and saved Jack to the best of her ability. It wasn't his fault. He was just too chivalrous, but he needed to get on the platform with her, which I think we'd all agree would have been the right thing to do. That would have been very Saturn and Aries too, like the survival. Anyway, I digress and just say, in our own lives, we've talked about this, knowing that Saturn and Aries can bring a degree of austerity. You just have to read the headlines to know that we're probably headed for some very choppy waters in financial markets with tariffs going up. I mean, everything is just pointing to the Titanic hitting the iceberg in the near future. And so the best thing you can do is put on your life vest and grab your loved ones, take care of yourself, don't go it alone. Saturn in Aries sometimes wants to isolate, wants to go it alone. Don't do that. Saturn in Aries is also about like taking care of your loved ones and, making sure that you're, prepared, like stock up, right? Like just do the best you can. I think there is something to be said about the fact that like sometimes, things are just going to happen. But if you're able to pay off some of your debt, I know it's hard. I know it's rigged against. The system is rigged, and that's part of why this is all happening. And I do want to do a bigger analysis of that too, because this has, I think, a lot to do with this kind of dystopian thinking that has been building for some time. With Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, especially with Neptune in Pisces, there was a rise in cults, a rise in cult-like behavior, people getting sucked into kind of the promises of things. Well, Saturn in Aries and Neptune in Aries is a little bit of like hitting the wall. And so you either can double down on that delusion and just like, you are just going to ride or die. Like, that's it. Like, I believe what I believed, and like, I'm not going to be talked out of it. And that delusion is with me until the bitter end, and I am like doubling down on it. Or it's like a cold water to the face where you suddenly are like, okay, that wasn't what I thought I was getting into. So the real F around and find out phase has begun. I want everyone to at least take heart in but it will accelerate, and it is probably going to be with us for some time. So keep your sanity. That cult-like behavior, it's interesting. I did a little research on culty stuff. Jim Jones and David Koresh both really gained a tremendous amount of prominence during Saturn and Aries. So they had already been laying the foundation during Saturn in Pisces with their cults. I mean, both of their battles for cult leadership, spanned several years before, but there was kind of like this doubling down. There was this big advancement. So Jim Jones moved to San Francisco in the late 60s, and that's where he gained fame and notoriety and like a huge following. And David Koresh, he was in a battle for control over the Branch Davidian cult, and he then was able to get the person who is currently leading it out of the way and take over that compound and become the Messiah to everybody who followed the Branch Davidians, and kind of he was able to clear the way to be that Messiah. So again, there was also do you remember the Haley Bop Cult, where they like all dressed in black with tennis shoes, and then they committed mass suicide? And so I'm saying this because there is it's kind of like it's like the reality becomes much more potent. And so if you are going to double down at this time and really, throw yourself into the cult, this is probably going to be your time to, sort of accelerate that defense of what's going on, or authoritarian behavior, because Saturn and Aries can be incredibly authoritarian, but it can also be incredibly rebellious and authority and breaking from authority. So it can also be a time of people stepping away from that kind of mind control or feeling like they are under someone else's banner. It's a time of individuality, but it also is a time where we can see more lone wolves, people who, again, like they have like a mental break because they built a fantasy around themselves during all of this Piscean time, and then they're faced with reality, because Saturn in Aries is a reality check. And so that can then lead to kind of an existential crisis and a breaking down of, what do I like? You can't take in this reality. And so there is this sense of just kind of going off lone wolf style, like terrorist. And that's not to scare you. I mean, all of these sort of energies have already been building. They are already around us, but that is very Saturn and Aries collectively as well. So I do believe that we are in for a time where we are going to be personally called to really see things clearly. Like, in our own personal lives, is there something that you've been denying reality? Is there something where you just wished something was a different way and it isn't? This is a time where you can kind of see things a little clearly and make constructive changes, where you can have the motivation, and that's the Aries, to do things responsibly, to put things in order. So again, like I said, like, did you spend too much money during this Piscean time and things got a little out of control? Can you seek help for someone to help restructure your debt, and you start to pay it off and you take responsibility? You're basically investing in yourself right now. So it's about responsibility and accountability to yourself during this time. And that takes bravery. It takes bravery to look at yourself and then take an account of where maybe you've been deluding yourself, or you have felt like a victim. There's been a lot of victimhood on the rise, and it's going to be like, who cares, is going to be the feeling. Now, do I say that is fair? Life isn't fair. But I think the victimhood is going to be shuffled to the wayside. It's like, next. We have to look at the historical patterns, and not just of Saturn and Aries, but in history in general. And, when people do get to be somewhat entitled or feel like they're owed something, there often is like a course correction. This is starting to get long. So I hope that gives you a little bit more information about Saturn moving into Aries, how it can impact our own personal lives, what I think it means for the collective. But again, you have to take the whole picture into account, because I do believe, like, the Luigi Mangione stuff and, what's happening with the big, beautiful bill right now. Like, all of this stuff is all in the stew, and it's all of these major changes. And so, yeah. Okay. As always, please do like, subscribe, share, and know that there's a reason and a season for it all. And the cosmos is conspiring to help us. And I'm grateful for every single one of you. This could be a very empowering time. So look at it that way. The more you can be unshakable, the more you can be brave, that's where you're going to shine. Okay, until next time, stargazers.